All right, everybody, welcome back. So, we know the Oath Keepers have been charged with conspiracy and coordinated the insurrection prior to January 6th. And we know that 4 leaders of the Proud Boys have been charged with conspiracy and superseding indictments, but we didn't know if these two groups had been in touch until now. And joining me to discuss this is congressional reporter for Politico, Kyle Cheney. Kyle, hello.
Hi, great to be here.
This is an incredible story. I'm really glad I got to speak to you today. You penned a piece for Politico that just dropped about coordination between the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers based on new court filings. Can you tell us what you found in these filings?
Sure. So we keep learning a little bit more about what prosecutors are gleaning as they look through more and more evidence. They're subpoenaing Facebook records and phone records, and they're slowly piecing together the whole alleged conspiracy here. And the new filings, and they come in these weird moments in the cases. Like right now, some of the Oath Keepers are trying to get out of prison. They're in jail pending trial, and they're saying, hey, let us out of here. And the government's saying, no, here's why you shouldn't. Here's the evidence we have to keep you in prison pre-trial.
Yeah, and in fact, they actually, on like March 1st or something during the first arraignment, the prosecutors didn't want to drop these potential conspiracy charges. So they're like, just hang on a minute, Judge. I promise there's a reason. And then finally it was revealed, and they put in an argument to detain them.
Exactly. So it's very strategic how they do this. And in some cases, it's also because they don't have the evidence yet. They're still going through so much material that sometimes the detail that they want, they haven't actually found it yet. And so as they find more information, they're starting to put them on the public record. And what we learned now is that one of the Oath Keepers leaders had been in the days before January 6th coordinating tactics, coordinating their approach with the Proud Boys and other militia groups that were participating. And while it's not shocking, that hadn't been established yet, and it suggests something much broader here than necessarily even applies to one of these groups or the other. It could be multiple groups working together.
And who was the Oath Keeper and who was the Proud Boys person? Are we talking one communication like back and forth, or were there multiple?
So the Oath Keeper's name is Kelly Meggs. He's the leader of the Florida Oath Keepers. And we don't know who he was communicating with. He did say it was the leader of the Proud Boys, which would be Enrique Tarrio, if that's who it was. I don't know if he was using a shorthand for a local leader, a Florida leader, potentially. But it was redacted in the court filing, so we don't know the name of the Proud Boy person. But it suggested that it was repeated. He said he'd had multiple contacts with this person, and they were talking about a very specific strategy in their telling to confront Antifa, had they run into Antifa on the street in Washington, about how they would, sandwich the group and get violent with them. But also just generally talk about, shutting things down. They used sort of veiled references to insurrection or sometimes overt references to insurrection. So it's really incredible fodder for the prosecution right now.
Yeah, and I was going to ask about that because the defense's argument is that, well, the evidence here only shows that our clients only wanted to be violent with Antifa. They didn't want to storm the Capitol or anything like that, but the prosecution disagreed with this assertion based on some of these communications. Isn't that correct?
Right. And it's been a challenge for prosecutors so far in this case in particular, because they have not been willing to put that evidence on the record of the pre-planning to go into the Capitol. Now, one of the judges in the case today, actually the main judge in the Oath Keepers case, said, well, pre-planning doesn't need to be days or weeks in advance. It could be the morning of. If they changed up and said, hey, today, you know what? We had a plan to go after Antifa, but you know what? Today we're going to storm the Capitol. They decided that the morning of January 6th, the conspiracy is still a conspiracy. So I think what we're seeing, come together is it was kind of twofold. They came in and said we're going to combat Antifa if we get confronted. But they also said we're here to stop the steal, essentially. They pointed to what Trump might do with the Insurrection Act. And I think the same guy, Kelly Meggs, said we're all going to get there on the 6th. And he said, do insurrection, I believe was the phrase. So it's pretty black and white.
Yeah, and I think they had also mentioned Meggs was messaging to this group about Trump invoking the Insurrection Act and that everyone should pay attention for that because that's the green light or something along those lines. And I mean, I could kind of see a defense being, well, he never invoked the Insurrection Act, so they never did anything, but they did.
But I mean, it's still a planning and a sort of conspiracy evidence. And to be honest, I still don't understand what the invocation of the Insurrection Act would have to do with the Oath Keepers, right? They don't suddenly get legal authority to storm the Capitol, even if the president were to invoke the Insurrection Act. And so somehow that was viewed as a signal of permission to get violent or to take other extrajudicial steps on January 6th, but I don't see where their basis in law would be for that.
Yeah, and it also kind of makes me wonder, because with the superseding indictment on these 4 Proud Boys leaders, there was an unindicted co-conspirator who had named Nordine in charge because they had nuked all their previous discussions because Enrique Tarrio had been arrested and he was on those discussions. So presumably they wanted to protect themselves from this arrested Proud Boy, and they created this new group. And so, we still don't know if the person who invoked Nordine, or also known as Rufio, to be in charge of the Proud Boys that day was in communication with this particular Oath Keeper, or if it was somebody else. Because like you said, Meggs is from Florida, and there is a Florida Proud Boy leader that was involved in this. And so it's all still, there's still like some like big puzzle piece that's missing here. And that kind of makes me want to ask you if Roger Stone was mentioned in any of these documents.
It's funny, some of the documents he's mentioned in, some of them he's redacted in, but you can tell that they're referencing him. They reference him particularly because he's was the subject, or the client, I guess, for the Oath Keepers to do security for on January 5th and 6th. And there's images of these same Oath Keepers providing this security detail to him at events he did. And so far, there's nothing that suggests he had any role in what happened at the Capitol. But the fact that he keeps popping up and he keeps getting referenced in these messages and someone they're going to spend time with, and he's seen with them at the Trump Hotel on the morning of the 6th. And, it's just, it keeps, for a guy who just barely escaped jail and pardoned at the last second, coming this close to a group that is now in trouble with the law seems like a interesting decision.
Yeah, and well, he's very good at insulating himself. We saw him do it with Credico and WikiLeaks. In the Mueller investigation, and we see that, whomever this unindicted co-conspirator number 1 is, seems like it's probably an insulation person between that kind of level of communication. But again, we just don't know at this point. But there seems to be, it seems the prosecutors are doing a dance around it and trying to convince the judges in these cases, like, well, just hang on, we're getting there, but we're just waiting. It seems like waiting for critical pieces of evidence, but more and more keep coming out.
Right. And they don't want to tip their hands entirely. I think there's still an active investigation. So if there's new subjects, or if they're trying to go up the chain a little bit, they don't want to necessarily say, here's everything we have right now. Some of it would come out in trial, and there's just still so many moving parts to this whole thing. They may decide that someone is, who they didn't view as a central player is now suddenly a key player, who because a new piece of evidence comes out or a new piece of video footage comes out. It's very fast moving and changes every day.
Yeah, and they held back on the conspiracy charges, superseding indictments on the 4 Proud Boys because they had not yet picked up Biggs and another one of them. I think it was either Rail or Donahoe. I can't remember.
It was Rail and Donahoe were the 2 most recent ones added to the indictment, with Biggs and Nordine. But what's clear in that indictment too is there were approximately 60 Proud Boys on that discussion chain, on boots on the ground in Washington, D.C. So that's potentially the universe of this conspiracy, at least in terms of people who were there. So this is going to grow. There's going to be multiple superseding indictments here. There's 10 Oath Keepers charged, only 4 Proud Boy leaders on this group, although there are many others charged in separate cases. That's going to all get knitted together at some point.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if the knitter is Rico Suave. I don't know. We'll find out. But I do have a couple more questions for you. I have to take a quick break, though. Would you stick around?
Of course.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, we're back. We're speaking with congressional reporter for Politico, Kyle Cheney, and his reporting on coordination now between the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers ahead of the attack on the Capitol. Now, you mentioned that the judge, Judge Mehta, allowed one of the Oath Keepers to go home on bail pending trial. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. This is one of the Oath Keepers named Laura Steele. She's a former police officer, indicted as part of the 10 Oath Keepers charges in a conspiracy. Mehta's pretty upset with the prosecution right now for a couple of reasons. They have made statements to the media. The former head of the entire Capitol investigation talked about seditious conspiracy charges that they haven't actually issued yet. And then anonymous DOJ officials made similar comments about the Oath Keepers to the New York Times.
Oh, yeah. We'll go over that.
Yeah.
We'll go over that. Yeah.
We can. But, he's basically said his message has been, we're going to deal with the case that's in front of us right now, not what might get charged later. And right now, what prosecutors have presented about Laura Steele and her involvement in this conspiracy is pretty limited. They know she was there. They know she joined the Oath Keepers, but they don't have any evidence that she helped plan this conspiracy, that she committed any violent acts, destructive acts, fought with police officers, recruited other members to the group. And so he said, based on all that, I'm going to send her home, but with very strict conditions, GPS monitoring, can't leave her house, no internet. So it's not that much different from jail, but she will be allowed to go home.
Yeah. And what I don't understand, because we've seen this before, what usually happens in these cases is that the prosecutor will speak to the judge in camera or ex parte and say, look, we can't release this now, but this is the stuff that we're looking at. So can you consider this in the bail? But I'm assuming, Judge Mehta is like, no, we can only consider what is on the public docket in front of us.
I think that's part of it. And the prosecutors even said, look, this is still an ongoing investigation. Even in their filings, they said in their communications that they were charging toward the Senate. We haven't reviewed all the video evidence yet to see whether they actually did that. And that is an ongoing investigation. So they readily acknowledge that they're not done pursuing this. And because of that, I think the judge says, well, the evidence isn't fully in front of me yet. So I can only go again with what I can see in front of me.
Interesting. One last thing here. You discuss, and you just brought up here a second ago, the former District of Columbia U.S. Attorney Mike Sherwin, acting Mike Sherwin, is a bar appointee, and his comments on 60 Minutes. And I know that Judge Mehta put out a minute order, an emergency minute order for a same-day conference 6 hours later with the attorneys in the Proud Boys case. Any info for us on that meeting, what Mehta told those attorneys? And do you have a sense as to, in that transcript as to whether or not this will jeopardize any of these cases?
So that was his fear. He said he told the attorneys and he hauled the Justice Department officials in too and was pretty upset. And this is not a judge who gets upset very often. He's pretty mild-mannered. And he said, you could taint the jury pool with this stuff. Like, we're going to hold a trial for these people on what they're charged with, not what they could be or what you think in your pundit chair might be supported here. And he said he's willing to issue a gag order if he needed to. He'd sanction attorneys who violated it if he needed to. And so that is just a live issue to watch. It's coming up in other cases. Lawyers are referencing it and saying, we have to be, the defense attorneys are saying these are extrajudicial statements in the media that could affect us. And the DOJ official said Sherwin wasn't sanctioned to do this. He's going to be investigated now because he's still an active DOJ employee. And whether he was, going off solo on this or going rogue in a way that could harm their cases.
Yeah. So Mehta didn't actually take any actions. It was just a warning about stuff he could do. So it seems that the cases in that are still intact. But I'm with you. The defense attorneys now have another arrow in their quiver to use to say, hey,
exactly.
We need to change a venue. We're not going to get a fair trial here. We need to delay the case, et cetera.
And they'll absolutely make a motion along those lines. Some of them even said, we'll reserve our right to make that motion later if we feel like we didn't get a fair trial. And so it is, again, these are things that probably aren't fatal to the case, but will come back. And if it gets worse, then it'll become a bigger issue.
Yeah. And I'm thinking also they're not fatal because I personally, and this is total speculation, don't think that these particular Proud Boys and Oath Keepers are the ultimate target here in this specific investigation. And I know that there was some public reporting saying that they are now going into discussion of plea deals with some of the people that they've arrested, but didn't get into any details as far as that is concerned. However, I would assume if they were going into plea talks, they would hold off on those charges, those conspiracy charges on the 10 Oath Keepers and 4 Proud Boys going into those talks. But who knows?
Well, as we noted, like the universe of people, I mean, the Oath Keepers in their messages said they had 200 people coming to Washington. I don't know if that's true or not. Proud Boys had 60 on the chat. Any of those people could be targets for flipping, for talking, and saving them, preserving themselves. A couple have even indicated, like Dominic Pizzola, one of the Proud Boys who was charged early for breaking a window with his riot shield.
He was the first guy in, right? He was like the first guy into to breach the Capitol.
Yeah, he was. And he renounced the Proud Boys and says he wants to make a deal. I don't know if that entails cooperation, but the bottom line is there's a big universe of people who might be willing to be informants on their Proud Boy and Oath Keeper colleagues. And, that may be one thing that they're counting on.
Yeah. And given the Oath Keeper who is asking to go home now because this is his first prison experience and it's very uncomfortable for him. We've got people who are angry about not having organic food. They don't seem like they're built for jail. So, I think that plea agreements, where applicable, are probably likely.
Lower down the chain, especially, and you start using those to roll up to the bigger fish, and that's sort of the standard operating procedure. And so I think that's where they're at right now.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on all this. I hope we have you back if you drop any more stories on this. Because, there's just so much more reporting coming out of this than there was out of, say, the Mueller investigation because they were so tight-lipped about everything. That, again, could be a problem for some of these prosecutions, but we're going to keep reporting on it, so I appreciate your time. Kyle Cheney, everybody check out his piece in Politico today. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.